Hi sewers, it's Psycho Sue, and I promised you I'd show you some tips and tricks that I use whenever I make a scallop neckline. This pattern is McCall's pattern, the green dress with the ladies' photographs that I have on my blog, sewmisunderstood.com, has this neckline and sleeves. So basically how I made this is I didn't upsize this pattern. I took the neckline from its original pattern, and I laid it on top of my sloper, and I copied the scalloped edges. Did the same with the front and the back and the sleeve. The scallops had to be resized slightly because my sleeve and my neckline is larger than the original. So it actually wasn't that much of a problem to do. Now I'm going to show you how you take care of these tricky little scallops. Here's my front pattern piece. Here's where I copied the scallop from the original pattern. And here's my kimono sleeve. And here in black is the scallop pattern that I use. I don't get a full scallop underneath the arm, but that doesn't bother me. It's underneath the arm. So whenever you do this, I cut out my regular fashion fabric from the bodice, and I don't bother to mark the scallops on that, because when you sew this, you're going to place the facing on the outside with the good sides matching, and then you're going to sew not a regular 5" seam allowance, but you're going to sew the stitching line. How do you know how to do that? When you cut out your facing, you use tracing paper and a wheel to trace these scallops. So this would be your pattern, this would be your facing, and literally take the little wheel, and this is the tricky part. When you get to the corners, I just pivot like this, follow the line, pivot like that again. I'm doing this one-handed until you get to your shoulder seam. And the same with the facings for the underarms. So that's how you would create the facing and how you would follow the stitching lines whenever you create scallop. As you can see, there's not really that many scallops there, so it's not too tricky to do, but I'd say beginning sewers might have a little bit of an issue with it. One of the other tricks I use is after when I got the facings slapped on top of the outside of the bodice and I'm ready to sew, set your sewing machine stitch length to a really small setting. I use maybe 3 or 4 clicks below the standard setting on my machine. So the reason why you want to do this is because whenever you're sewing a curve and you're using a wide stitch, what happens is when you try to get around the tight circumference of that curve, that long stitch makes it appear less like a smooth curve and a little bit more choppy. If that makes any sense, I found that whenever I decreased my stitch length, that whenever I sewed that really tight little inside between the scallop parts, it came out looking much better. And whenever I manipulated the fabric around the curve, it came out much smoother because the spaces in between the stitches aren't as big. So that's tip 1, decrease your stitch width. The second one is after you've got everything sewn and you turn the facings to the inside, I trim with my pinking shears. Pinking shears are these scissors with the funny little edges. I don't know if you can see that. So I trim with my pinking shears, and I leave about a 1/4 inch all around, and then with regular scissors in between the scallops here, I cut almost to that stitch mark, as close as I can get to the stitch mark in between every little scallop. So whenever you turn these right side out, that scallop is going to show really nicely. So there's kind of a danger whenever you clip close to there. I've had clothes that I made that I've done that with that have actually frayed, and those frays come out on the outside of the garment and you wear them and they don't look pretty. So one thing I do now, at every meeting of a scallop point, I put fray check on the inside, right where I clip to the seam. So this stops the fabric from fraying during wash or when it gets old, because that stitch is such a tight little area, it can be prone to damage in washing. So I use the fray check. I get it at my local sewing store, and it smells pretty. Doesn't take long to dry at all. Put it in between every little scallop, and then wait about 5 minutes for it to dry, and turn my facings to the right side and pull out every little scallop. I use my tracing wheel, fits nicely up into the scallops to poke out the shape. And then of course I use a steam iron to set the shape. I manipulate the facing so it's not bulging out in some points. And you can hide some errors when you're doing this too. If there's like a corner that's poking out, it's not a perfect circle, you can manipulate the fabric with your fingers or a small implement and shape it into a nicer circle and then iron it flat. And in most cases it stays that way, because once you iron out with a steam iron, even just your regular wash cycles don't seem to manipulate the fabric enough where it looks bad again. So those little tips and tricks for scallops, guys. Happy sewing!